Namaskar. Good evening. Let's begin our lecture tonight. This is our 90th lecture series. I think it's been a very interesting journey, and we're inching towards the century. 100th lecture. I don't know who the person will be, but we're looking for the 100th mark. I don't know, this marking is always a very interesting thing. You cross 25, 50, 70, and 100. It goes on, it's a journey. But anyway, it's the 90th lecture, and I'm very happy and honored to introduce you, the Kathmandu audience, Walter Winkler, who is no stranger to Nepal. You know from the bio and the brief intro that is circulated for this lecture. Walter Winkler was a Peace Corps volunteer in Baitari district in far western Nepal in the mid-1960s. Very interesting time and very difficult time. Very difficult place at that time. It was still difficult in far west Nepal. He received his PhD in cultural anthropology in 1979 from the University of Wisconsin. I'm reading from the flyer that has been circulated because many of you may not have seen this. Some of the Dr. Winkler's publications include oral history and evolution of Thakuri political authority in sub-regions of far western Nepal, 1984 in Himalayan Research Bulletin. The Song of Praise, thematic element in the history of sub-region of far western Nepal, and then which was published by Nepal Studies Conference, University of Wisconsin-Madison. And the 1976 book, The Spirit Positions in Far Western Nepal. Today, he is speaking to us on the title of the lecture is Everybody Has a Story, New Approaches to Story Analysis in Far Western Nepal. We have, I think, we Nepalese are, and by and large, the audience here, very aware that we all have stories, and we want to tell stories in different forms. There are individual stories, there are collective stories, there are community stories, different kinds of stories, and it involves. I'm not that expert on this conversation. I'm a political scientist, by the way. I'm not a cultural historian, or I'm not a classicist. But when I read his flyer and then try to make sense of what it would be. It's a very interesting way of looking at how do we narrate our everyday experience, how myths are circulated, because we all need stories to live. I think storytelling has been one of the oldest practice or ways that through which we lived in a very interesting time, difficult time. Stories has enlivened us. Stories have been scared us. So stories are an important part of the who we are. Today Walter will tell us or share with us, based on his research, empirical field research, plus his reading of the various texts, how do we look at the stories? How do we make sense of the stories? Because, as you know, I see Anna here is a very good writer. The story has a plot. It's a beginning, a mid, a text, and then end, and then conclusion. So every story, sometimes stories are typical product of the modernity also, but it predates modernity. But when you look into the format, it's a story of modernity also in terms of format, but it's a pre-modern, post-modern, all stories. Stories are all kinds. So although it has a plot, it has this thing, and therefore it has a systematic way how do we look at the stories. I think this is where the Walter will tell us how people look at the stories, how do they analyze the stories, how do we look at the stories and understand the different narratives and different discourses in society. Without this, I would like to request all of you to switch off your mobile. I know important messages and things will come, but please put it in silence. If you can't switch off, please make it silent. And the format of the Baha lecture is that speaker will speak generally, I don't know about the I'll ask you, 45 minutes to an hour. 45 minutes would be most appropriate in a sense because we're late evening. Then another, depending on the audience thing, half an hour question answer session. Or if anybody wants to jump in, comment and ask and further inquiry, and then we'll be finished up. So with this word, I would like to welcome Walter Winkler. It's our pleasure and honor. So you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for all coming today. And I'm going to, I've been out 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks in far western Nepal. And I've been climbing up and down the hills. So my knees are still good, and I can jump up and down here to make the changes. And I'm used to speaking from the floor to groups. And if you can't hear me, let me know. And I'll adjust my voice. We all okay voice-wise? Yeah? And if I don't make any sense, just go like this, and that'll mean I'm just going completely over your head.
I think the camera may want to come here.
Oh, all right. Well, they can move the camera wherever they want to, because either side of me is quite good. But you can see. Well, here, my situation is a very interesting one, because I've been going to Baituri district since 1966. And there's a gentleman here, Kishore Bhatt, who I've been part of his family. His father I knew. Well, actually his father I know. I knew his grandfather, and I knew his grandfather beyond that. I know 4 generations of that family in Baituri because I always go back to Baituri. And unfortunately, I didn't spend enough time in Kathmandu, probably. And this time I said, I owe it to the scholars here, in the Himalayan scholars and the research center here, to come and talk and tell them about some of the things I've been doing. I have kind of an interesting background because I was here 1966 through 1968. I have to admit, I was a panchayat man in those days. I was a panchayat trainer, if you believe that. And it shaped me because I went all around the district. In Baituri is a fair-sized district with a panchayat training co-worker. And so my view of Baituri, contrary to a lot of anthropologists, was never of a village, it was of a whole district. And we'll talk about how that view has shaped me. So I did that 1966 through 1968, and then 1982 to 1984, I came back again to do my research in anthropology. And with my dear wife who was with me. In those days we had to walk up there, and that was a 6-day walk to get to Baituri. As one man told me the other night, one old timer, he had been a young boy, and he said, we used to walk up the Machali Kola, which is a river up there, and he said every time he had to cross Machali Kola, he put a rock in his pocket. He had 36 rocks by the time he got up to Donaldura, and then you have to cross over to Baituri 2 more days. Well, now we can go on the road in a day. So those were the experience. But I left that kind of work in 1982, and I went beyond the, as we would say, the Kalopani, and you gentlemen would know what that means. And I went into the business world. And I left my academic work behind. I'd written some papers and so on. And I went to work for oil companies and spent my career overseas. I had to get another degree then to do that. I also got a master's degree in human resource administration, and then I worked for the oil companies. And then my last tour, I worked in China, and I worked in Indonesia a lot of time, and my last tour was 10 years in Saudi Arabia. So that kind of shaped my perspective too. So I have a district view of things and a strong international business things. You know, but my first love, and I touch my heart, was always in Nepal. Even when I was in Saudi Arabia, we would come for Christmas in Nepal, you know, because we enjoyed it so much. And my family, they've all been out to Baitardi, and my daughters have been out to Baitardi, so that's very much part of our home. So now I'm back in academics, my true love. So I came back. So when I came to the first conference, they said, "Walt Winkler, we thought you were dead." Okay, well, what can you say? I'm still alive, at least for part of the evening. and so, now, it's an exciting time for story analysis now. And why is that? Well, let me just start out by saying we're interested in discourse analysis.
Oh.
What's discourse analysis? Well, if we're talking about discourse, we're involved in a discourse right now. And there's 6 elements in that discourse. We may be talking about past as well as present, and they mix up together. Here I'm talking about past, and here we are sitting here in the present, experiencing this. So this is part of our story environment. We call it a discourse environment. Past and present. Memory and experience. I'm telling you about the last 3 weeks out in Baitardi, and I'm telling you about my memories in Baitardi. You see, these are things coming together in a story environment. You know, in the old days, the folklorists would find the smartest old-timer around and just write down the story. That was it. You put the story, put it in a book, and it was done. We don't do that anymore. Now we analyze a story. Well, some people do that. New generation doesn't do that. We look at the story from multiple ways. So now we look at the past and the present, the memory and the experience. We also look at the personal ID and the social ID. Who am I? You know, this American that had a business career and came back into academics and so on. Who are you? I met some NGO people here already. And each of you have, and we have now our social identities coming together here. We have an important thing. We have an interviewer, let's say a speaker, and a listener, and that shapes the environment so much. That's why I didn't want to be up here, because it'll be a different thing if I'm up here than if I'm down here with you. And if you're doing field work in storytelling, that's what it's all about. Shaping that situation. We talk about orality and literacy. Orally transmitted traditions are different from the literary forms of those traditions. So as soon as you write it down, it has a new kind of life. And lots of people have done research about that. Stories once written down, what happens to those stories. So we have to think in terms of that interactive. And if you read it, it's a narrative, it's in a book, you know. Your interaction with a book is quite different from your interaction with me. I'm feeding off of you right now. I'm watching your faces, you know. If you're a happy face, oh, there's a happy face. It makes me feel good. If there's sad faces, you know. So that it happens. So that's what storytelling now is, a much bigger picture with a lot more of what we call discourse elements than it ever has been. I just have to tell one story now. When I went out to Baitardi first time, I don't know why, but I asked for a hardship post. And then when I went out there, people said, the Nepali said, you must have done something really bad to be sent all the way out to Mahakali Kinara. Because Because we used to say out there, Doti jane roti kane farkani na doti na topi. Yeah, yeah. And for those of you Nepali not so good, it meant if you were a government official and you were sent to Doti, and that whole area is called Doti, and the language is Dotiali out there. If you went out there, it was very expensive. And you couldn't get good rice. You were going to eat roti a lot of the time. And because of the expense and everything, when you came back home, you didn't have your tat or your doti anymore because you spent all your money. Na doti, na topi. You know, yeah, I talked to a young man the other day, and he said, well, it's changed. That doesn't work anymore. And he said, doti gayo, bat Kyle, all right, you following me? Farkane, paisa, cut. Meaning, went out there, he ate rice, and when he came back, he had money in his pocket. Paisa cut, you know. And so it's changed now. Of course, the road, as I mentioned to you, the road has changed and everything like that. Okay, so that's where I was out there. These are the elements of a discourse. Do a little. I'll come back to this one in a moment. When I went to study a region out there, what could you do? Well, there were people that in India had looked at regions. Cohn from the University of Chicago and R.G. Fox had done it. Of course, some of you heard about Dumont's approach and so on, and they talked about regions either in terms of a political, a little kingdom that was there, Thakuri, Rajput lineages that were there, or they talked about it in terms of marketing centers, or they talked about it in purity and impurity and so on. What I looked for was something to analyze. You know, I'm walking around the whole district. I couldn't sit in one place. That was the old style anthropology. I'm going around the whole district. What am I going to look at? So I would talk to people, usually senior men in the area, 121 of them. And with all those elements of discourse, I collected from them interviews. I had those interviews. My dear wife would sit on the hillside, drink tea, pakodi, you know, I had pakodi then, look at the Himalayas, and type out my notes. It was very nice. So I ended up with 400 pages of notes of interviews up there. But what could I get out of these? Our style then was themes. You look at themes, broad, general categories. It doesn't go very far when you do a thematic analysis. At least I found it didn't go very far. You tend to get into what are called archetypes. You cluster those themes together, and then you say this, you give it a name, and those names become archetypes. You know, storytelling, the fairy tales are all like that. You know, wonderful. It's not bad work, but they're all single archetypes out there. So that was the thing. Now, I tried to do one other thing. We said there was a fellow named Barth at the time, quite good. Some of you, yeah, some of you were. Are some of you social scientists here? I should ask that. Right away. Oh, good. You know, Frederick Barth. A Barthian analysis said people look at those themes and they make choices among them. So choice making. So I did. My dissertation was using themes in a what we would call it Barthian analysis. Some wonderful people have worked with themes out here. Ortner has done remarkable things in Nepal with the Sherpa populations and so on with thematic analysis. I should write this down just because, you know, an American hates to admit it, but the Russians came up with this term. They said there's fabula, that's just the structure of a story, and sujets. That's all the stuff that goes into making up the story, the talk and the timing and the organization and all of these kind of things. We're talking about discourse. So the Russian linguists started hitting on this idea. They're saying, you know, you don't want to just get the best story version and write it down. You want to go after all the stuff that goes into making up the story. What was the meeting, the meeting like, and the conversation like, and who were the people like, and how are they related to each other, and all of those kind of things. Well, what did I look at? I looked at this thing called discourse, and we'll go through the notes that some of you have, and I'll explain those notes. I had narratives. So when we do an interview, you type up the interview, so I could go through that narrative. And in those narratives, there were stories. You know, if you and I had some tea for an hour together, sooner or later it would come up, well, where's you from, and where's your wife's mite, and how long have you been in the valley a long time, and where did you come from, and you came from here, there, the other, and then we would start. You would tell me a story as part of it. Now the interesting thing we'll talk about. People didn't like in the past small stories. No good, the small story. We want the big story. Well, I collected big stories too. These are the Hurkia Damai would sing stories, and we call them Barda in the Western Hills. Trimolchan, huge story. It has goes on for a couple of hours. And the Dupile Raja has a story, and Sagram Karki has a story. And Dilly Bum has a story. Those are big stories. But if you rely on the big stories, that there's just the big stories, and it says everybody else, well, your story doesn't count so much because it's just a little story. We want the big story. I have to laugh. Even some of the big Thakuris, and a lot of Thakuris out in Baitardi, they would say, well, we don't know our story yet. Go tell the Damai to sing the song, and that's where our story comes from. So, in a sense, they didn't know their own story, but, there was a professional singer. We also have what we call Raibat, with Batarai. There are tellers of stories as well out in that area. Okay. We'll talk a little bit. I'll go through the list. Mikhail Bakhtin comes along. He's a fellow, and he said, in European literature, it goes along one course, and all of a sudden you have Dostoevsky come along, and in an earlier period you've got Cervantes, and Don Quixote comes along. And those guys show multiple voices in the story. You get it from different directions, different people speaking in the story, and you hear what's going on in their head in their story. And sometimes it's even foolish stuff, for example, Cervantes, and sometimes it's kind of ugly stuff, and with Dostoevsky's stuff. So he says a chronotope is you have to put together the time of event and the place. Those come together. So you talk about what happened at a threshold, what happened at a sacred watering place, what happened at a cave where a god was discovered. And it goes on and on and on. But those things collapse together, and then people think in terms of those things. Last week I was at a cave in Baitardi. I had to go down there because it's a cave called Ishwari Ganga. It's a dam. It's a sacred water place. I went down and to sleep out at night near that cave because I wanted the experience. Well, there's a powerful story about that cave and the god Jagannath, Shivaji, that was found near that near that cave. So that's a chronotope for a whole set of other things that come next to it, other stories and explanations and things like that. And so then he said there's polyphony, there's multiple voices talking in it. So when you tell the story of Ishwari Ganga, you know, the storyteller may start out by talking about the gods are in heaven and they tell Shivaji, don't go down to earth, that's a bad place to go. And he said, I'm going to go as a snake, and blah, blah. And he, you know, and he started at 170. And then you hear the snake talking to the person. You know, please help me, I have a wound here, they hit me with a rock, will you take care of me? And the man, and so now they're talking, so now we've had two voices, celestial voices, and now we have the earthly voices going on, and then later there's another voice, another god says, yeah, but Shivaji, you know, you're down at the bottom of the hill, and I'm up at the top of the hill, not so good for you, you're in the goat, and I'm in the gar, and you know, and all of this kind of stuff goes on and on. So that's what they call polyphony. Now we look for polyphony in stories. And as Cervantes did, and as Dostoevsky did, and so on, we look for heteroglossia, and that means people have a point of view. The man that was telling me the story out in Vaitari was Bul Sarki. Right. So he has a Dalit caste perspective on things, and he puts that into the story. He says to the snake, you know, I can't touch you because my touch is polluting. I can only, and then the story goes on. I'm interested now in these stories, how people get problem-solving devices out of them. Some of them are a little harsh, the problem-solving. For example, there's several stories of when the Thakuris get out of line. A key committee of the most powerful Chetris eliminate the Thakuri, and then right away they go to another place and hire another Thakuri and bring him in. So there's these kind of schema, problem solving. There's other kind of problem solvings too. Some of them are very not desirable anymore, certainly from an NGO and from a women's perspective. You know, like if you're abused, you could commit suicide and you become a spirit that comes and haunts the other guy's family until he makes it right for your family. So there's these kinds of stories as well. And then later we can talk about how people move their stories from the old context, as you were mentioning, sir, up into a more modern setting, and they say, let's scale it up into how can we use these ideas in the modern setting. I gave a talk to a group of students the other day, and I ran a survey on them. What do you think's happening to our stories at the local level? This is a question. If somebody gives me an answer, I'll give them a business card. See, this is the American business. What I'm going to incent. What's happening to local stories here?
They're all going on Facebook.
Yeah. Well, are they going? I'll give you. Are they going on Facebook? Are the kids talking about stories when they're doing this? Are they talking about their local stories? No. No. They're. I give you the card. Isn't motivation terrific? It just works. Thank you. No, we're losing the story. I ran a survey of 15 different titles of stories, of important stories. 3 of them had strong recognition. 3 gods were recognized in one place. So I'd say 4 out of 15 were recognized. Deolhat is a famous archaeological site in just below Gardi at the center of Vaitari. And Wali Kadar, one of the deities, was well known. Jagannath was well known, the story of Jagannath, and Bhagavati, the story of Bhagavati out there, the local story. But the other stories weren't known anymore. So in one sense, as we say, I'm fighting a rear guard action. Because I wanted to teach those kids how to go out and get their old people and sit down and ask some simple questions so they could record their stories. Turn off your smartphones and go off and go talk to the old people. And you know, one night we did it in Vajradi. I just said, with Kishore's family, I said, I'm just going to tell you stories tonight. And everybody set off their cell phones, and I told them stories about my experience in Nepal. It was wonderful. You know, that's the old... Do we have some older gentlemen? I won't embarrass you. You used to do that, probably. You used to sit and tell stories with each other, particularly near the chulo, and it'd be warm, and yeah. All right, so that's the idea. So these stories are out there. Now, why were these stories important at the time? Big deal now, identity. We are far western Nepalis. What does that mean? We have an identity. Well, the first thing it means these days, SIL, Summer Institute of Linguistics, and the Tribhuvan University Linguistic Department has identified Dhotiali as a distinct language of its own. And then they've said within Dhotiali, the language of Darchula and Baitardi and Donaldura, I think Achama's in there as well, are dialects within it. Whoa. So all of a sudden, we're not just talking country folk Dhotiali, La Hitapui, Batkayata, you know, all of those kind of things. It's a language. It's always been a language for a long time. All right. Now the second thing that becomes important then, we have stories that are our own area stories. You know, I asked the kids, what stories do you know? They would say, the tortoise and the hare. I said, whose story is that? You need to know your own stories. But you know, they're reading the English books and they're learning the tortoise and the hare and all of that. Not a bad story, but you know. So anyway, it's a way of teaching about character. You know, there's all kinds of ways of teaching about character, but imandari, bahaduri, you know, all of those kinds of things are in the stories as well. And one of you I was just talking to a moment ago, can you believe it? American business is crazy about storytelling. Because we've found out in American business that the metrics, the statistics, that's not everything. We still got all the metrics and things go wrong. So then you have to ask, when we last had a problem, what did we do to avoid it? Well, so-and-so was manager, and he was a certain kind of manager, and he did certain things with the people, and certain things. There were stories about those things. So now we collect those stories. We call it qualitative analysis. So we also understand the story side of leadership and problem solving. Okay, let's see where we're at. We're going to get to your questions. So what did I do out there? I focused on a region, 4 regions of Baitardi. There's Central Baitardi, there's Protrodi, a region. There's Patan Swarad, there's Lekam Marma. You know, we say out there, Nango Bandamati, Manche China, Chepti Bandamati. Do you know the answer? Gaon China. Yeah. So I've wondered all of those places, the region. And then we say, not only is the big story important, but small stories are important. You know, they're very important. I got to read you one thing. I love it. It's in one of my favorite stories. It's in a story about the Dipal Raja, and 2 guys are talking to each other, and Latte Sound Chetricast out in our area is talking to Irie, another Chetricast, Dunia, and Irie says, I have no good story. And Latte Sound says, even of you of small stature, you must have a story. And so everyone has a story. Even if you, now they don't mean Hocho statue, they mean if you're not an important man in the district, you all have a story. Okay, small story, large story. I talked about Mikhail Bakhtin. So then the other thing I work with is metonymy. Everybody loves poetry and everything like that. Everybody talks about metaphor, metaphor, metaphor. You know, the things, you are like a rose, or you are like the Himalayas, or you, all of this kind of stuff. But what drives storytellers is metonymy. So you say, if a person is a Thakuri, for example, what are the attributes of a Thakuri? So what are the things associated with him that gives you a description? Or if you were a leader, or if you were a strong animal of some sort, if you were a bison that gives wonderful milk, what are the things that are about that associated? Good horns, gives milk regularly, very gentle disposition, all of this kind of stuff. So that's how storytellers build their things. So when we look at stories, we can trace the metonymy that goes through those stories. Just one other thing. If you ever go to a psychologist or psychiatrist, and I hope you don't have to, ever. I've had some family experience with that. And you talk to them, they'll listen for your stories, the small stories. Because from those small stories, and that's where this development of small story analysis really came from the psychology field. Because people, when they talk and talk and talk, then they tell you these small stories that explain their life. How are we doing on time? We should shift to question and answer.
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Yes, there we go. We're going to shift to question and answer. That's where I'm about and what I'm doing. Oh, that's good. This is all the better. And now we'll just put some candles on. No, I've done 100 larger stories, 300 small stories. There's about 400 stories I'm doing an analysis on now. So let's ask some questions. Who has some questions out there? Geez, you mean I'm going to take all my business cards home with me? Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that the youth now only know a few stories. I was wondering, why do you think that some stories persist?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would go to Bakhtin. They have such a geographical presence. It's in their face. Gwalik Kedar is a huge peak right there. The temples are very impressive, and the ritual cycle is very strong there. Matter of fact, I always feel bad. A lot of the villages are kind of empty because the people have gone down to the Terai to live. But when like Navaratri was recently there, all the Terai people are up in the hills going to their temples, you know, so people learn those things. Good question, thank you. Got another question? Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm from Forestern region of the country. I know about the storytelling tradition in that part of the country. And I got to learn many things about my culture, my language, my history through that story. But as you have already discussed, you know, in the recent days, that tradition is not that much in practice, you know. So that is being replaced by this social media type of thing. People have access to mobile phone, and even in the remote areas, you know, the grandmothers, the mothers, they don't tell stories to their children.
Yep.
So, how can we revive? How can we conserve this tradition?
Well,
what are your observations?
I think, you know, I'm an old academic, used to be an academic, and I think we'll teach it in the schools. We're just going to teach a unit of storytelling or collecting stories. It's a good thing for what are good questions. Question asking is a wonderful topic. Recording, you know, all kinds of things like that. And we have to go at it that way. Once they get into it, their grandfathers and mothers and so on will love it and give them love back, and then the kids, maybe we can turn it that way, you know. Yeah. You know, I caught it at a good time, 68, 72, 74. There was none of, the media stuff was very weak then, so I could just get that stuff all the time. I'll give you a quick, oh, yes, sir. Go ahead.
I really like the inclusiveness in what you're talking about.
Yes.
The idea of, you know, not just the big story. In the development sector, though, we use a technique called MSC, most significant change technique, which actually asks us to discern, to analyse, to focus down on what the most significant change occurred as a result of our intervention within a particular time frame. I'm interested in your reaction to that quite discerning, discriminatory approach to story collection.
I like that. And, you know, in the business world, we tried to be revolutionary because they would all say in our work group, team of engineers like this. And we would say, what makes a skillful engineer, a great engineer? And they would say, well, you got to ask our bosses or ask the expert. And I say, no, we don't want to hear that. Tell me about a critical incident that happened, and what did your best engineers do? And they'd tell the story. And then I'd translate that into, we call it competencies, and I'd try and put it up on the building. You know, probably what the same kinds you do. And I like that. I think that's a wonderful approach. And that was be the kind of thing for a teacher learning too. You could go beyond the story to say, what have we learned from this story? And it's a great thing. Yeah.
Yes, my curiosity actually is about you, Walter. Connect the dots between Panchayat in Nepal and oil company and establishment in the USA, and then Dhoti. I mean, how do you connect all these dots?
Yeah. You know, my daughters say, Daddy, why do you become such a... I enjoy being near the temples and talking about the gods and things like that. At one point in my career, I went to the dark side. Do you know that image, to the dark side? I knew oil companies were not so good, but I made that choice. I tried to work inside, and I did. We tried to organize small teams, you know, and we did. We did good work. You know, but I admitted I went to the dark side. So there was always another side of me. We would say in English, the angel on the other side said, you know, you really like that stuff in Nepal. Get back to that stuff. Get back. Go out to those temples. You know, and that's what happened to me. And now I enjoy this. I mean, I love this stuff. You know, and I come back every 2 years.
I had a different path, okay? I was born in this country and spent most of my life in the USA, in the corporate world, and back here in Nepal.
There you are.
So, which one is the dark side? Is it corporation is the dark side, or technology is the dark side? Or
you know, it's all...
the dark side?
That's good. What a wonderful question.
Yeah.
It's all how you see it. Your light may be my darkness, and my darkness may be your light. Well, we'll see what happens with the Trump administration. We may find out what's the dark side.
Light and dark, yes.
Yeah, let me get one gentleman at the back, then you're the next man. Yes,
Sir,
sir.
I want to say that all of this analysis, we get this case study and narrative analysis. Every civilization has got its own importance. We have also civilization. Why the Western, when I was a child, my father used to say, my grandfather dad, these things. There was a civilization like this, forefathers like this, like
Yes.
this. We used to see Bamsawali.
Yes, Bamsawali, yeah.
We have all Regmi. I'm Regmi. We have a Bamsawali, big Bamsawali.
Yeah, well, and you need it for marriage relationships and everything.
And I want to say that what we don't see on the Western world, so Western civilization, I've not seen the father saying that my grandfather used to do like this to their children.
Yeah.
We don't see,
Yeah.
even we go through the electronic library also. There is no so much, but in Nepal, we have got so much these things. Why it is not so on Western world?
Oh, that's a good question. You can at least get a master's degree or a dissertation out of that. Out of that question. I think is part, I'll react, with the westward expansion in America, everything became so in terms of immediate acquisition of land, of wealth, opportunity, and so on. So our historical view, we would say, is foreshortened, became very, very close. My father came from Germany, you know, and so I'm first generation American, you know. I've never visited his home in Germany. I know very little about Germany because the emphasis was be American, you know, that kind of thing. So that was and that's a problem for us because we have a history, but we've cut a lot of it off, and that's a problem for Americans. Yeah. Thank you for asking that. It's a very insightful question. Yes, ma'am.
Actually, I'm from mass communication background, so
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Actually, when we are talking about globalization, global citizenship, and big countries are bombarding us with the homogenization.
Yeah.
And I have a curiosity that what decides big and small stories, either proximity
Yeah.
or the status quo. And the next question is, now I haven't read well, but I think in my observation, now geopolitically, politics is shifting from water to civilization wise. So to what extent do you think that small stories rooted in our own civilization will connect us with our own civilization to develop ourselves as a unique country?
Yep. Well, I'm a strong believer in that your unique local story. See, I even don't lie. Please be seated so you can relax. I even get nervous in Baitardi when people, they haven't done much of it. Bring in all the Indian stories, you know, from India, because we're right close there on the border. No, they haven't done that. They're Dhotiali. They still have that kind of loyalty, even though they're losing that thing. So I think that homogenization is a problem. The difficulty is going to be, we need English as a world language, but we also need our roots in our local languages. So like, for example, some of the teachers would like to teach Dhotiali to make sure that the children know that. Well, maybe we should make sure the parents teach the children to do that and let the schools do the English. But these are policy questions. But you're onto a right thing. I think the homogenization of this thing is not a good direction to go myself. Yes, sir.
Time management. I think the focus of your presentation. Did you miss it, or you have already presented the focus of your presentation?
Yes. Go ahead. What?
I mean, there are many pages.
Yes.
Of your posters.
Yeah.
And I feel I'm afraid whether the main focus of your presentation is missing, or you could present.
Yeah.
No,
So,
if you have missed, please.
Yeah. The kind of papers I do, and I didn't repeat my papers here, would be I'll take a story and analyze it in terms of chronotopes, and in terms of the mnemonics, in terms, there's a whole series of things.
Can you take a very short story and analyze it?
Well, yeah,
If you have time.
That's and I'll be glad to stay with you. And you know, the one that is interesting, and I touched on it, Ishwari Ganga is a god who came down, Shiva, and was found as a snake then. And so now you go from an epic account, Ishwara Ganga, to a polyphonic local account that says, and the snake said to the bull, and so on. And then you use heterogeneity there, not heterogeneity, heteroglossia there to say, he says, I can't touch you because I'm an untouchable. And the God says, that doesn't matter, treat me and I'll give you what you want. And then you go to a folkloric question and answer, and he says, give me the leftovers from your meal. And then he says, in good folkloric style, he says, and you know, they used to give so much grain to the god that the leftover was just wonderful for us. We had a lot, but they don't give so much anymore. So he goes through that. So you can trade now, rather than a single theme out there, you can trace the elements that are going on in it. And what becomes even more powerful now is people recreate that story by once a year going to the big temple of Gardi in Jagannath and marching all the way down the hill to this cave to honor the god at the cave. Let me in one other piece of the story. It's such a great story, and the god then is there, and Malik Arjun is up at the top of the hill, and he says, you're down in the goat, and I'm up here, and so Shivaji, Jagannath says, we'll see what's that, and he goes underground all the way up to the top of the hill. And Mallikarjuna disappears, and there's a temple at the top of the hill. Just happens that one of the deepest caves in Nepal has been Patal Bhumeshwar has been found in Baitardi now. So these kind of things. So those are the kind of elements that a discourse approach would pull out of it, and that's the kind of thing. I hope that's in a nutshell.
It's up to you because the focus, I don't know.
Yeah. Good. Another, we got to get questions back.
Well, I missed most of your presentation, but I was just curious whether during the collection of the stories you were able to find different versions of the same story by different people.
Thank you so much. So now I talk to the Brahmins about, and I know the Brahmin priest at the temple of Ishwaraganga. And I say, I don't say that the bull said this, but how did the god get down here? Well, it's a footlinga. It popped up as a stone. Okay. That's a different version of the story of the god. That's okay, because that's important to the Brahmins there. And to the bulls, this is very important. They have their own temple of Jagannath at the top of the hill. So everybody has a story. In the old days, we would try to, as a folklorist, try to get who's got the best story, who controls it. But I bet the Thakuris have their version of the story too. That's fine. That's what discourse is about. Good. Did I answer? There you are. That's what it is. Yeah. So we don't try to average it out, standardize it out, that kind of thing.
What is your take on these various versions, and what do you account is
Well, I would ask then, how is it meaningful to those people? Yeah. Yes.
Just a follow-up to her question, I was a bit curious about when you get these different versions, and you as an individual who want to share the stories, would you try to keep on certain, would you be biased, or like the gentleman earlier said, would you try to be more inclusive, or would you just try to strike on something very specific? Or would you share everything that's been told by all the individuals who've been part of your...
Now this sharing thing is a problem, because what happens here, once you publish this stuff, it takes another dynamic now, a completely different dynamic. So now there's competition. Who's got the best collection of stories? You see that, Ratna Pustaka, go down there, in so many of these things. And then you have hegemony. Some people are going to say, my ancestors Who said, who mentioned Banshawali? My ancestors have the longest Banshawali. Who are these other guys to say that? And then, now the written versions are going to interact with the oral versions. They cross over and get into each other. And now, nobody wants to be from here. Everybody wants to come from somewhere. Everybody is a Rajput on the run from somewhere, you know. And and there's immigration bias. So everybody's story starts out in our area, Dubanagar, Deoprayag, is over in Garhwal. Everybody starts there, or some of the Brahmins will start from Benares and that kind of thing. Yeah, all right, that's okay. That's their version of the story. I think what I'm working with now, and later you can advise me, I'm going to drop caste out of these stories and just say, a poor man told this story. It's not necessary to have caste in the story. So a poor man, or a villager told this story. The story is still good, and we can say where the villager is from, but why raise this casteism issue of it? You're kind of suggesting when you say, well, it's not necessary. It just says that a person from this area, if it's a good story, good complex story, we just say a local villager told this story.
Would you continue to include gender, though?
Yeah, wonderful thing. One of the best stories I ever got, it was a rainy day, and the guys didn't know, and they called in a local woman. She told a wonderful story. This is a story of Dilly Bum, a local hero. I missed the gender issue. My apologies. Fog, the local songs out in Baitardi, wonderful songs. I collected some of those, but not enough. So there's a whole gender approach to story that's out there. Some people have looked at it in some other areas, but it's something that certainly needs to be done.
But still, all your stories, it's only the male character you have presented. There are no female characters in those stories.
Strong set of female characters. Whenever the cases of injustice are frequently female cases, and they're all in the main tragic cases where the woman has committed suicide historically and has become what we call in the West a pijas, and that pijas, sometimes that pijas becomes worshipped and transfers into a minor godling, and sometimes it's just a pijas.
Anyway, the women are always in a subordinate position in the stories. They're always injustice.
Yes. Yeah, I cannot tell a lie.
In the culture I'm from, and I grew up in Ireland, that's not the case.
No, yeah, of course.
Female is a very strong character in our story.
Yeah.
And we have professional storytellers traveling.
Sure. There you go.
What type of characters is highly stigmatized in the Dhotali, different versions of the Dhotali story?
An interesting question. Highly stigmatized in that. If you come from the outside to test the gods, Nagi Malla is an important king from Dhoti that came over. And boy, he got into all kinds of trouble because he challenged the local gods. So you don't want to challenge the local gods. And one time I was asking too many questions, and the Dami said, Mero Anta Nagara. Don't try to look for my roots. So I was kind of, digging way deep, and so that was, they were sensitive to that. So that would be a person that challenges the gods, and it's usually an outsider, and there's a strong tradition in Kumaon, people that steal other people's wives, and that includes demons that do that as well. But those are bad guys, and they always end up in trouble in the bottom of a lake, or not a lake, in a river or something like that. And then anybody that wants to ask questions at the end, I'm here, and please, I'll stay as late as when. Kishore, yes.
And we have seen many situations of people in Baitari. So this concept of storytelling being attached with the roots, Now, surely you know these things are going away. So these things, when you know about your culture, when you follow this, does this change the character of people from those generations to this generation? If it does, it is in the positive direction or in negative?
You know, that's a wonderful question. A wonderful question. I'm not smart enough to answer that question. I'll be honest with you. We have hopes. We have hopes. I think knowledge of our history is important, and I think that it makes for stronger citizens. So that's in a positive direction. Yeah, I think so. Otherwise, if we don't know that story, then we make mistakes all the time. More mistakes. We make mistakes anyway, but we would make more. Good question. Yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful story.
Thank you.
Wonderful story of Walter, and then thank you very much for coming to Social Science Baha and ANHS lecture. So this is a token of appreciation. It's a mark.
And thanks for being such a good audience, please. I'll be here if you need any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Yes.